respect to Bruce Power's plan to ship radioactive waste from Lake Huron to Sweden through the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence. This waste consists of 16 steam generators, each weighing 100 tons. We are very worried about the precedent that this is. It opens the way to more shipments of radioactive waste across the Atlantic. Only because of public uproar did the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission agree to have a few hours of hearings today and tomorrow. This is not sufficient. There are 6 representatives here from both sides of the border, Canada and the U.S. Our first speaker will be John Bennett from the Sierra Club of Canada.
Good morning. I brought a prop. I know props aren't popular on Parliament Hill, but this is just to remind us all why we're here and what we're talking about. We're talking about nuclear power and what it can do if it's not managed properly. In Canada, we have a tendency to ignore the environmental laws and regulation when it comes to nuclear power. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission is going ahead with a hearing, despite the fact that they're violating the Environmental Assessment Act, which requires them to hold a full environmental assessment when a project that's been approved under the Environmental Assessment Act is fundamentally altered by the proponent. If we do not go back and revisit environmental assessments, we're inviting developers and proponents of all types to bait and switch, to say we're going to do it this way, get approval, and then say we're going to do it that way. And what they're doing this time is dangerous and unnecessary. So the Sierra Club of Canada is going to be testifying this afternoon. We're going to ask for that meeting to be adjourned and that an environmental assessment be called. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm going to have to leave before the question period, but this is one of the most important issues we have to face. Nuclear power is the dumbest mistake Canadians have ever made, and continuing it the way we're doing is even the first mistake. Thank you very much.
Merci, John. Je suis de retour pour montrer un peu la dimension du Québec dans ce projet. Pour le Québec en particulier, il y a aussi plusieurs signataires de la pétition pour interdire le transport des générateurs de vapeur. Plusieurs organismes et municipalités ont signé cette pétition. En particulier, il y a 30 maires de municipalités au Québec qui ont signé cette pétition, ce qui correspond à environ les voix de 100 000 citoyens. Alors, je corrige le nombre, le chiffre qui est mentionné dans votre petit cahier. C'est pas 90 000, en fait, c'est 100 000. Alors, ces déchets vont suivre la route maritime par la voie maritime du Saint-Laurent et le fleuve Saint-Laurent ensuite, pour aller vers la Suède. Ces déchets vont revenir à Halifax par bateau et seront ensuite acheminés par voie de terre jusqu'au point de départ qui est en Ontario. Et ça, ce sont les résidus très radioactifs que la compagnie suédoise n'acceptera pas. Alors, ces générateurs de vapeur ne sont pas des déchets de faible activité. On doit les traiter comme des déchets nucléaires transuraniens et les laisser sur place. Traiter ces déchets comme de la ferraille et disséminer la radioactivité dans des articles de consommation courante est très irresponsable. Nous insistons que les politiciens prennent leurs responsabilités en main dans ce dossier et ne laissent pas cette décision à la Commission canadienne de sûreté nucléaire qui a trop souvent montré sa complaisance envers l'industrie. Merci de votre attention.
Good morning. My name is Sharen Skelly. I'm the chairperson for Cargo's Citizens Against Radioactive Generators in Owen Sound. I'm also a resident of Owen Sound. I have two concerns, and they are the lack of public input and the lack of trust that we have in all three agencies, Bruce Power, Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and the Owen Sound City Council. And you can also include the Public Health Unit. I will talk briefly about them here, but I have more information in my submission today at the hearings. Bruce Power's proposal left no room for public debate or discussion. There were 3 open houses held. One was at the Southampton Museum, one was at the Owen Sound Health Unit, and one was at Bruce Power. At these open houses, we were given strictly a pamphlet, and you could go in and talk to the people that were there. There was no room for negotiation. It was one-sided discussion. Owen Sound City Council has included the residents in the discussion. I discovered about this project by reading the Owen Sound Sun-Times one day. They talked about this proposal from Bruce Power. I thought it just did not sound logical or safe. I thought surely they would not be in favor of it, but then I was surprised to find that they were. So I was left on my own to question them, send emails, make phone calls, and that is how Cargoes was formed. The Public Health Unit gave one brief information session. It was about 2 minutes long at a city council meeting, and then there did not seem to be a lot of research put into that information session. So as you usually say, you'd like a second opinion. And the CNSC gave a presentation at a city council meeting. It was a PowerPoint, and that was it. That was all the information that we've gotten in order to make this proposal happen, but there really is no input at all from the city. So that is how the public hearings came about, complaining and then all the other individuals and organizations. Trust is a really big factor in this. I'm not sure of the dates, so you can't quote me on these, but Bruce Power experienced a leak of heavy water several weeks ago at their plant. It took them about 10 days to report it to the CNSC, and then the CNSC put it on their board, and we have not been notified of that yet in the press. So we do not have the trust that they want us to. They want to be transparent, but they also want us to trust them in the information they give us throughout this process. So we will discuss those today at the hearings, and hopefully we'll find out more information about that.
Good day. My name is Kevin Kamps from Beyond Nuclear, a nuclear industry watchdog group in Washington, D.C. And I also serve on the board of directors of Don't Waste Michigan, just 50 miles across Lake Huron from the Bruce Nuclear Power Complex. There is a groundswell of resistance across the Great Lakes, in both Canada and the United States, to this radioactive steam generator shipment. For instance, the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, a coalition of more than 70 mayors representing over 13 million Americans and Canadians, has spoken out strongly in opposition to this reckless proposal, stating that a great deal is at stake. In addition, Great Lakes United, a binational environmental coalition of scores of groups, has passed a resolution against this radioactive waste shipment and has been joined by dozens of other organizations from across the basin and beyond, as well as thousands of individual petition signers in both countries. In the United States, resistance is focused on formally petitioning the U.S. Department of Transportation, Pipelines and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, to carry out a full environmental impact statement, which is legally required under the National Environmental Policy Act, grants a permit for Bruce Power's risky radioactive waste shipment through U.S. territorial waters on the Great Lakes and connecting rivers such as the St. Clair, Detroit, Buffalo, and St. Lawrence. As part of an International Radioactive Waste Action Day, declared long before CNSC called for today's public hearing, American citizens are contacting their U.S. senators and representatives, calling for oversight from the federal agencies and upon the federal agencies that are supposed to protect the public health, safety, and the environment. In fact, Americans are calling for a law to be enacted that would ban radioactive waste shipments on the precious Great Lakes, the drinking water supply for over 40 million people. This Action Day includes events around the world, in Canada, several U.S. states, Australia, Finland, and Scotland. The widespread public outcry expresses concern about the accident potential of this radioactive steam generator shipment sinking in the Great Lakes. The emergency preparedness plans appear to be woefully inadequate. How long would it take to bring a shipboard crane capable of lifting these city bus-sized, nearly 100-ton steam generators from the bottom of the Great Lakes? The public is also very concerned about the dangerous precedents this proposal would set, including the potential for high-level radioactive waste shipments on the Great Lakes and the hazardous paradigm shift of considering radioactive wastes as commodities, and the danger this presents to unsuspecting members of the public around the world. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to say happy International Radioactive Waste Day to everyone. My name is Lorraine Rekmans. I'm the Aboriginal Affairs Critic for the Green Party of Canada. And I'd like to start by reminding us all that we're standing on Algonquin territory at this moment, the territory of my ancestors. I'm interested in CNSC's activities as they pertain to Aboriginal consultation or the lack thereof. The Supreme Court of Canada has ruled that the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission does have a duty as an agent of the Crown to consult with Aboriginal people when it undertakes initiatives that will impact on Aboriginal and treaty rights. I think it's interesting to note that the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission staff has already prepared a draft of the license to allow Bruce Power to ship this material across the Great Lakes, and there has been no evidence of consultation. In the interest of time, I won't take up much more, but I would just like to say that because the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission has a directive that it has chosen to ignore in this undertaking, there's a question before us, and that question is, what recourse will First Nations have if this shipment is to take place? Thank you.
My name is Gordon Edwards. I am the president of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility and also a member of the Great Lakes United Task Force on Steam Generators, which is both Americans and Canadians working together to learn more about these shipments and to educate people about them. First of all, I would like to tell you that much of the material in the radioactive contaminants in the steam generators include 15% plutonium and heavier than plutonium isotopes. These are man-made materials which are high toxicity alpha emitters. They represent 15% of the becquerels in the steam generators, but each alpha emission, it's a certain type of radiation given off by plutonium. Each emission is 100 times more biologically damaging than a gamma emission or a beta emission. So when you factor in that extra 100, it turns out that the plutonium isotopes and the other transuranic isotopes, which have very long half-lives, dominate the health hazard of these materials. When these materials are described as low-level radioactive waste, that is a completely misleading statement. In fact, they would have to wait hundreds of thousands of years for these steam generators to diminish to a level where they could, in fact, under existing regulations, be safely transported. Because at the present time, the shipments that they're proposing to make, according to CNSC staff alone, exceeds the maximum allowed amount of radioactivity on a single shipment by as much as 50 times. That means that even if they broke the shipment down and sent one steam generator at a time, they would be exceeding the IAEA guidelines on maximum permissible radioactivity. And for what purpose? The only purpose of doing this is so the steam generators can be disassembled, melted down, and then the scrap metal will be sold for free release, which means for unrestricted use. Nobody stands to gain from this except the nuclear industry. And in fact, in your press kit, you will see there is a United Nations report and a report from the Steel Manufacturers Association, and there are many other reports of a similar nature, very alarmed about the increasing amount of radioactivity in scrap metal, which is becoming a worldwide problem. We are contributing to that problem. Why? We are allowing Bruce Power to break international regulations. Why? Why is there no consultation? Thank you.
Petite question, vous parlez d'un précédent. En fait, je vais vous poser deux questions en même temps. Est-ce qu'il y en a déjà eu des précédents ou ce serait vraiment une première? Puis comme deuxième question, quelles seraient les conséquences s'il y en avait un accident? Ça pourrait être, est-ce que ce serait la faune, la flore? Qu'est-ce qui pourrait être...
C'est un précédent au Canada. Je crois que c'est un... Is it only in Canada? Is it a precedent only in Canada, Gordon?
It's a precedent for North America, really.
C'est un précédent pour l'Amérique du Nord. On n'a jamais expédié à l'extérieur du pays des déchets nucléaires. Ils sont toujours restés habituellement sur le site là où ils ont été produits. Alors, les déchets ontariens restent en Ontario, les déchets québécois restent au Québec. On n'a jamais expédié ces déchets-là en dehors du pays.
Et quelles seraient les conséquences d'un accident? Les
conséquences d'un accident? Bon, alors là, il y a peut-être d'autres personnes qui seraient mieux placées pour moi, mais je vais répondre rapidement. D'abord, il y a le fait que il y a différents types d'accidents qui pourraient arriver. Un des genres d'accidents, ce serait d'échapper un de ces générateurs de vapeur au moment de le transborder. Par exemple, il faut le transporter de la centrale nucléaire de Bruce à la municipalité de Sound, là où se trouve le port. Et puis là, il faut le lever avec des leviers énormes. Il y a risque que ça se brise. C'est déjà arrivé que des choses, qu'on échappe des choses. Alors, si on échappe ces générateurs de vapeur-là, on peut peut-être libérer certains des éléments transuraniens qui sont dans ces grands tonneaux, qui sont scellés, mais qui peuvent se briser. Alors, ils contiennent des éléments transuraniens, comme l'a noté M. Edwards, dont le plutonium. Et le plutonium, c'est l'élément le plus toxique sur la planète, fabriqué par l'homme dans des centrales nucléaires. Alors, puis si aussi il y a un accident maritime, si ces déchets se retrouvent au fond de l'eau dans le fleuve Saint-Laurent, par exemple, ou dans les Grands Lacs, ben, à long terme, ces toxines peuvent s'échapper. Deuxièmement, aussi le fait que ça peut nuire à l'industrie touristique, dont dépendent beaucoup les Grands Lacs et les riverains du fleuve Saint-Laurent.
Question, Mr. Edwards, please, about that, essentially.
Yeah.
Bruce Power is saying that these generators are all welded shut.
Yes, that's true.
And if you stood beside them for an hour, a meter away, you would get less than an X-ray's worth of radiation. So before you answer,
yes.
My question is, essentially, what are your fears about that if the real radiation that's potentially dangerous is sealed shut inside these generators?
Well, first of all, it's important to realize that even heavy equipment like these steam generators can, in fact, end up at the bottom of, for example, St. John's Harbor. There were 2 steam turbines, not radioactive, which were being delivered to the LaPro nuclear plant within the last 2 years. The barge flipped over and those machines went to the bottom. Now, when they did the environmental assessment in 2005, Bruce Power, for the whole refurbishment of the reactors, they identified 2 scenarios which would lead to possible off-site radiological consequences, doses to the members of the public. One of those was dropping a container full of radioactive waste. The other was dropping a steam generator. And when they talked about dropping a steam generator, they talked about releases of gases and fine radioactive dusts as being a possible consequence. But they have never really published an analysis of waterborne accidents or accidents which would involve other types of drops. They were only talking about very short distance transport from the reactor itself to the adjacent Western Waste Management Facility. What about if they drop one into the cargo hull of the ship? What about if the ship, for some reason, does go aground or comes to grief? We don't know what the consequence of those are. We don't know how good those welds are. One thing we do know, however, is that this is just the tip of an enormous iceberg, because once they ship these 16 steam generators, they're going to be shipping more and more and more radioactive waste. And we're concerned even more about the precedent that is established than about the individual shipment involved. Why should Canada suddenly be exporting radioactive waste? Why should Canada suddenly be mixing radioactive waste into consumer goods through recycled scrap metal? Weren't we always told that radioactive waste was going to be sequestered from the environment and safely guarded for forever? Why this change of plans? In the original 2005 environmental assessment, Bruce Power stated that these were nuclear waste, they would not be exported anywhere, they would stay on site, and they would be segmented and put underground. That was the original plan. Why have they changed their mind, and why is the Canadian public, why are the Canadian political authorities not being asked to address the question, should Canada have a policy of exporting radioactive waste? Should we have a policy of transporting radioactive waste waterways? These are important policy questions that go far beyond a simple licensing decision.
Mr. Edwards, could you just touch on that? Your colleague held up a book with Chernobyl on the front of it.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, you're behind him. You were mentioning plutonium. I'm just hoping to hear from you. I mean, what are you saying is the worst case scenario that could happen?
Well, I don't think the worst case scenario is probably a catastrophe. We're not talking about a catastrophe, but we are talking about a serious nuisance which isn't going to go away quickly. If, for example, these containers were to go down and break open, the seals were to break, then you would have, if they could not retrieve them in rapid order, you would have leakage of this material into the waterways. And what bothers me the most is the extreme long lifetimes of these radioactive materials. If they only had a half-life of 6 hours or 6 weeks, then you could say, well, in a couple of years, it's all going to be decayed and gone. These have half-lives in the tens of thousands of years. So we're talking about risking the escape of radioactive materials into the environment, which are going to be permanently there, and which could be leaking for literally for centuries if they don't do the proper retrieval work.
On my colleague's question, Bruce Power is saying these things are sealed. There's no way that that they can get.
Yeah,
so they have said that this is just you're overblowing the situation and you're striking fear to residents of the community.
Well, I don't think I'm striking fear. I think Bruce is striking fear by transporting radioactive waste. People don't like it. People don't want it. That's evident. Why is Bruce doing this? They don't need to do it. They've even said themselves the economics are marginal and that they might, it's barely break-even economics. Why are we doing this? The reason why, I believe, is that they are trying to establish a precedent whereby radioactive will no longer be seen as radioactive waste. What they're trying to do is unburden themselves of the liability. And, of course, they would rather the public just stay asleep and not pay any attention. But I believe that they themselves, if you read the Bruce... I have in your press kit put Bruce Power broken promises. They stated unequivocally that and this they stated to the Saugeen Ojibwe people during their consultation with them, they stated the only materials that we recycle are materials that are proven to be non-radioactive, and that radioactive materials like steam generators cannot be recycled because of that reason. And those materials will go to the Western Waste Management site and they will stay there. So why the broken promises? And why is it that that they are exceeding International Atomic Energy Agency guidelines on the amount of radioactivity in a single vessel by about 50 times? If these are such low levels of radioactivity, how do you explain that? I think that what we're doing here is we're having the usual kind of public relations cover-up that many industries undertake. They're asking you to look only at the external of the sealed vessel and not worry about what's inside. But we are worried about what's inside because the whole purpose of sending them over there is to break them open and release what's inside. And some of that material is going to end up in everybody's metal products because that's where it's destined.
Sounds like you're not quibbling with Bruce Power's assertion of how much radioactive material is in there. Like they're saying it's equivalent to an X-ray if you stand there for an hour.
That's
are you
correct.
arguing with that, or are you just saying that it's a more dangerous kind of radiation?
They are really misleading people by talking about that because they're assuming that the real danger is the penetrating radiation, which is not the case. Transuranic waste is well known to have ingestion hazards, which are very high, but they do not give off very much penetrating radiation at all. If you go to uranium tailings, we have uranium tailings which are going to remain radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years. The penetrating radiation, the radiation that you measure with a Geiger counter, is not very great, but the ingestion hazards are very, very high.
Are you going to be swallowing radiation that's
if it gets out, yes, and if it gets into the metal products, then it is out. It's out into the environment. So the question is, should we be disseminating these highly poisonous materials?
You're not pointing to either governments, either federal or provincial, for help here. Why not?
Well, I think the federal and provincial governments, unfortunately, have abdicated responsibility to the nuclear industry. They have shirked their responsibility to provide leadership, provide policy direction. They've basically said, hands off. They've said, this is the nuclear industry's idea. This is what the nuclear industry is doing. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, as far as we're concerned, is part of the nuclear industry, and they are the ones who are facilitating it. But politicians are saying, don't ask us for help, because we don't have anything to do with this. We believe that this is a cop-out, and we believe that they have surrendered so much power to the nuclear industry that now they are pretending they are powerless.
Also noticing that internationally they ship nuclear waste. It's quite a common practice to ship stuff internationally.
Not nuclear waste.
Stuff has been shipped into Port Hope out of Iraq. We've seen waste shipments out of France to Japan. I mean, you see it all the time. I'm wondering if we...
Excuse me, those aren't waste. Those are considered to have commercial value. This is not something that has commercial value.
The material.
Nobody wants these steam generators. Nobody wants it.
My question is, can you point to a case internationally where there's been an accident that has actually resulted in what we're describing here, which is a nuisance, a catastrophe, whatever it is?
I'm not talking about a catastrophe, but I am talking about a serious trend. Not that I know of. I'd have to search and see if there has been. I think that, we all know that accidents do happen.
Peter's question, to what degree, you say this is a precedent in North America, and I'd like to get some clarity on that. What exactly is the level of precedent when you do have a fair amount of shipment of nuclear material around the world? What are you saying is precedent setting?
Well, what's precedent setting here is that we're taking radioactive material, which is waste from a decrepit nuclear reactor, and it's waste which nobody actually wants. There is nobody who actually wants radioactive metal. There's no market for it. If you put on Craigslist, I've got a nice stockpile of radioactive metal, anybody want it? That's not what people want. There are report after report complaining about the level of radioactivity in our metal supply and saying it's becoming alarming. So what the precedent is that they are trying to disseminate radioactive waste, consumer products, against the consumer's wishes, not because the consumer wants it. Now, this is a far cry from medical isotopes, where there is a value to the patient, to the hospital, to the medical community, or isotopes used in pipelines or industry for a purpose. This is not for any purpose other than to divest the nuclear industry of its responsibilities to manage the waste.
How they're moving it, or the fact that it's
and the precedent is that they're
what exactly is the precedent that you're
okay,
fuzzy on?
There's two precedents. Okay, I'm sorry for the confusion. There's two things. One is shipping radioactive waste per se over the Great Lakes. That's a precedent, and across the Atlantic Ocean. The other precedent is using those radioactive wastes to disseminate them into consumer goods.
Revenir là-dessus, qu'est-ce qui vous fatigue? Est-ce que c'est l'envoi du matériel par la voie maritime? Est-ce que c'est le recyclage du métal?
OK, c'est deux choses. Comme vient de M. Gordon Edwards en anglais, il y a deux choses. C'est le précédent. C'est le précédent qui est l'envoi par voie maritime de déchets nucléaires. C'est la première fois qu'on envoie des déchets nucléaires en dehors du Canada. Et puis la deuxième chose, c'est le fait que ce métal-là va être utilisé, ensuite va être fondu par cette compagnie suédoise, va être fondu et mis en lingots. Donc, il va y avoir, on va disséminer finalement des éléments radioactifs très nocifs, comme le plutonium, l'américium, le curium, dans des lingots de fer qui vont être utilisés pour fabriquer des objets de consommation courante. Ça aussi, c'est un précédent.
L'utilisation de la voie maritime. J'essaie de mesurer un peu votre message ici. Qu'est-ce qui vous fatigue le plus?
Non, mais c'est ça qui nous fatigue le plus, finalement. c'est le précédent que ça crée. Il y a l'accident, mais c'est pas surtout ça qui nous irrite. Ce qui nous irrite surtout, c'est le précédent et le fait parce qu'on veut démanteler, on va devoir démanteler plusieurs centrales nucléaires en Ontario, au Québec, au Nouveau-Brunswick, et on va vouloir se débarrasser de ces déchets. Ce que le Canada avait décidé jusqu'à maintenant, c'est de les enfouir. Et maintenant, on fait fi de cette décision-là. On veut passer à côté. C'est l'industrie nucléaire qui a décidé de faire ça sans l'aval d'un quelconque organisme. Puis la Commission canadienne de sûreté nucléaire, qui est censée être là pour être le chien de garde pour les citoyens, pour nous protéger du danger nucléaire, ben, ils font pas ça du tout. Ils sont vraiment là à une extension de l'industrie nucléaire. Ils leur octroient tous les permis qu'ils veulent. Ça nous irrite beaucoup. C'est aux politiciens de se prendre en main et d'intervenir dans ce genre de dossier qui est beaucoup important de laisser ça à la Commission canadienne de sûreté nucléaire.
Est-ce qu'il y a une alternative? Si par exemple, la compagnie suédoise disait on pourrait recycler les déchets sur place en Ontario, ou si Bruce Power vous disait on va envoyer le matériel à partir d'Halifax, est-ce que votre point de vue, quel est-il?
Ben, notre point de vue, c'est que ces déchets-là n'ont pas besoin d'être recyclés. Ils sont contaminés. Pourquoi recycler quelque chose qui est considéré déjà comme déchet nucléaire? Je pense que c'est très irresponsable de les recycler.
Oui. À propos du transport par voie maritime, vous dites que c'est un précédent, qu'il y a d'autres centrales nucléaires qui devront être démantelées. Est-ce que c'est vraiment une petite partie d'un éventuel transport maritime qui pourrait se passer?
Et ça, c'est la première fois que ça arrive. Puis ça, c'est la première phase. En fait, parce qu'on démantèle deux réacteurs à Bruce, à la centrale de Bruce. Et puis chaque centrale nucléaire, ou chaque réacteur nucléaire comprend 8 de ces générateurs-là qui pèsent chacun 100 tonnes chacun. Alors là, on parle de 16 générateurs, qui est le premier pas que fait l'industrie dans cette direction-là. Alors là, si on compte que chaque réacteur compte 8 de ces générateurs de vapeur à 100 tonnes chacun, ça finit par en faire beaucoup. Il y a une vingtaine de centrales nucléaires au Canada.
Question for me. Okay, the ship's going across one of the lakes. It goes to the bottom. What happens? Does it mean I can't drink the water? What's it going to mean?
Do you want to answer?
Well, I wanted to say that if there were to be a sinking, that even if there were no release of radioactivity, it's been shown in the United States, for example, that there's a radioactive stigma impact. To be news coverage of the event, and consumers will then have a response to that. They will avoid certain things, like perhaps the fisheries of the Great Lakes. There will be an economic impact, even if there's not a radioactivity release. But of course, if there is a broken container that leaks its radioactivity into the Great Lakes, then that economic impact will be much worse. We're talking about industries like tourism, recreation, fisheries. There's Great Lakes water used in agricultural irrigation. And it's also been shown in the United States that simply designating a radioactive waste transport route decreases the property values along that route even before the shipment begins. So it depends on how much radioactivity gets out, but even without a leak, there would be economic impacts.
Still, like, if it goes to, see what viewers and readers are going to want to know, if that goes to the bottom of the lake and it sits there for a month before treatment, you know, am I still going to be able to drink the water? Is it going to affect the fishing? I mean, is there going to be, a concrete example that you can give us of what the impact would be?
Well, if there is leakage of certain of the radioactive isotopes, cesium-137, for example, is water-soluble. So is certain isotopes of plutonium. That would contaminate the Great Lakes water supply. It could biomagnify or bioaccumulate in the food chain and the fisheries. So there could be ecological impacts resulting from the leakage.